Low-performing schools in rural areas resolving the issue, presented by Andrea Hopkins. The policy issue that I will be examining is low-performing schools in rural areas. The issue of poor academic performance has stretched beyond fundings for schools. In addition, poverty, equity, wealth, healthcare, and family have all grown to be recognized as issues that also have an impact on a child's school performance. Traditionally, teacher pay and funding have been known as large influential factors on school performance, but the attempt to solve these issues has still faced some difficulties due to the neglect of important underlying issues. Unfortunately, those who live in rural low-income communities face severe and unfortunate educational disadvantages. For example, Georgia has the third largest rural school population in the United States and has expressed concerns for increase in teacher pay, community support, and mental health support. On this slide, you can see the effects of low-performing schools in rural areas include child performance in school shutdowns, low-quality education, poverty and crime cycle. Stakeholders include various groups of people, such as students, parents, teachers, administrators, other school staff or faculty, Department of Education, and lawmakers. This is important because it provokes ethical concerns regarding equal distribution of quality of education, funds, and resources, as well as concern for the future of impacted students and the future of the education system as a whole. Many parents, students, teachers, and families have all argued that poor education sets up our students, especially those in rural areas, for failure and cause them to be trapped in an ongoing poverty cycle. Where is the education system as a whole leading us to in the future? Let's take a closer look.
I want to talk to you about my kids. Now, I know everyone thinks that their kid is the most fantastic, the most beautiful kid that ever lived, but mine really are. I have 696 kids, and they are the most intelligent, inventive, innovative, brilliant, and powerful kids that you'll ever meet. Any student I've had the honor of teaching in my classroom is my kid. However, because they're rural parents, I'm rich, and I argue because they are mostly of color, and the seldom get to see themselves awesomeness that I see in them. Because what I see in them is myself. Or what would have been myself. I am the daughter of two hardworking, college-educated African-American parents who chose careers as public servants. My father, a minister. My mother, an educator. Wealth was never the primary issue in my house. Because of this lack of wealth, we lived in a neighborhood that lacked wealth, and henceforth a school system that lacked wealth. Luckily, however, we struck the educational jackpot in a voluntary desegregation program that buses inner city kids like now out to suburban schools where to go. At 5 years old, I had to take the automatic bus road to a faraway place to get a better education. At 5 years old, I thought everyone had a life just like mine. I thought everyone went to school and was the only ones using the brown crayons to come up with their record, while everyone else was using the peach color points. At 5 years old, I thought everyone was just like me. But as I grew older, I started noticing things like, how did my neighborhood friends know everyone was outside from the morning and go to school that they I how come I noticed the things about me while my neighborhood friends don't even have a music class? While my neighborhood friends learning and reading material that I had done 2 to 3 years prior. You see, as I got older, I started to have this everlasting feeling in my belly was supposed to have bigger departments with seasonal planning, concerts, digital, visual, performing arts. I was supposed to have fully resourced biology or chemistry labs, school buses that brought from door to door, specially prepared school lunches. I was an active school. These are things our kids don't get. You see, I've been a little while grateful for this amazing opportunity that I was being given. I wasn't ever felt the pain of what about everyone else? There are thousands of other kids just like me who deserve this too. Why doesn't everyone get this? Why is a high quality education only exclusive to the rich?
In the previous video, you can see that the speaker addresses the unequal opportunities that low-income students face in education. She mentions how, as a child, she was fortunate to have a better education than other students of color, and even describes it as unlawful. This further emphasizes the issue of unequal distribution of education and resources of students in affected areas such as rural communities. The political environment revolving around current issues or ethical concerns regarding education often determine the level of attention that these issues will receive. For example, right now, teacher pay and salary is a large concern of teachers as well as community supporters from various states. You've even seen rallies and protests take place. Being that this is a rising concern and well-emphasized concern of today, you see a lot of lawmakers or a lot of policymakers giving it a lot of attention. However, just because it receives a lot of attention doesn't guarantee that policy implementation will be conducted. Policies and laws that have been implemented in the past and that are still presented today or represented today include the No Child Left Behind program, school districting, school funding, behavioral academic programs such as IEPs, which is Individualized Education Program, benchmarks, and end-of-year tests. All of these policies or laws ultimately measure the success of schools. And they impact these schools because they ultimately or have some type of influence or impact on the amount of funding that these schools will receive, as well as the attention that they receive from the U.S. Department of Education. Unfortunately, schools that generally do not meet these expectations tend to receive less funding from the government and often resulting in school shutdowns. The primary way that organizational management has an impact on low-performing schools in rural areas is simply by its organizational structure. For example, the United States Department of Education is the organization that I chose to be my primary focus of my project as well as my other assignments for this issue. Power in the Department of Education is separated or spread throughout the federal level and state level. The federal level is responsible for generating national policies or guidelines that all state departments of education have to follow. Distribution of resources is generally left up to the states to decide which schools and which areas that these resources or funding will be provided to. With that being said, rural areas where most low-performing schools exist, even though exist in some urban areas, tend to be left out of the equation or receive less money from the state. Primary ways that human resource management impacts the issue of low-performing schools in rural areas include recruitment, teacher retainment, as well as student retainment, and also creating a ripple effect of energy. These ways can be either negative or positive depending on the situation. In other words, if there is a lack of strong leadership, teachers are less determined to fulfill their job duties. On the other hand, if strong leadership exists, then both teachers and students are more determined to fulfill their duties and responsibilities. For example, at a local school, many teachers have quit due to the disrespect and lack of support from their principal. They explain how they feel bad for leaving because it's not the kids, but they simply cannot handle the stress of working for someone who is rude and verbally abusive. Students and parents have also expressed their witnesses to these situations. To make matters worse, those who are above the principal are biased towards her. Therefore, they refuse to take any action to address the issues that both current and past teachers have addressed. In addition, this can cause a ripple effect of negative energy because the disrespectful demeanor that the principal displays causes both teachers and students to have a negative attitude in the school building. This negative energy is exposed to students who can both see and feel the energy. When students are constantly exposed to this type of behavior, parents become concerned and develop ill feelings about the school. Here you can see the various stakeholders that I mentioned earlier in the presentation are all starting to become involved in this equation. As Hislop mentioned in his article, there is a linkage between human resource management, the desire to share knowledge, commitment level in the workplace. However, if the atmosphere does not welcome ideas, then it will not produce this type of a relationship. A positive example of human resource management influence on commitment level, student retainment, and teacher retainment is the Danish employers organizations being relatively stable due to the new adaptations of structure and respect. And lastly, budgeting. Budgeting can affect goal implementation and staffing as it relates to school funding and teacher pay. For example, low-performing schools are notorious for teacher turnover or shortages due to low budgets or budget cuts, which limit teacher pay. Specifically, in the article by Hammond, Sutter, and Thomas in 2016, they stated that how in the recent years this has been a growing issue. In addition, the search for new teachers has been difficult for low-performing schools in rural areas, which in return yields lower test scores. Budgeting can sometimes have a positive impact on the issue when certain provisions are made. For example, new budgets may include money set aside for new test materials, increase in teacher pay, or software that will boost academic performance. A list of ethical concerns regarding the issue of low-performing schools in rural areas are provided on this slide. Number 1. Shutdowns of local schools, forcing relocation and integration into better neighboring schools. Number 2. Students receiving low-quality education. 3. Ongoing cycle of poverty. 4. Setting students up for failure. And 5. Better performing schools receiving more money and attention. The two primary ethical concerns that I focus on throughout my assignments in this project include the first two. Schools in rural areas performing low due to the lack of high-quality education is an ethical issue because innocent children are not receiving high-quality education simply because of a situation that they have no control over, which is the area that they live in. Unfortunately, the lack of high-quality education has various factors such as high teacher turnover rate, lack of resources, and low funding. For example, the Center for American Progress in 2011 provided research on rural education that has often been overlooked and underfunded, in addition to recruiting and teacher retainment. The other ethical concern that I focused on was low-performing schools in rural areas being shut down and forcing students to relocate. This is an issue because students are entering at new schools with low academic levels, which will create an achievement gap with the new school. If the students from low-performing schools overcrowd neighboring city schools, this could also have a negative impact on the other schools by transferring academic issues. The goal should be focusing on bettering the current conditions of the rural schools and public schools that these students were already brought into. Ways that the Constitution impacts this issue include the following. Starting with number 1, the 10th Amendment recognizes powers of the state. Education is one of them. By ultimately leaving the power of education to the states, this causes each state to have their own different way of implementing the education policy. Not only does this yield unequal distribution of education policies as well as resources on a state level, but it causes further conflict and national conflict beyond. 2. Legislative branch manages structural controls through regulations. In other words, the legislative branch is responsible for setting specific procedures and rules regarding how different policies should be implemented or carried out. 3. Judicial branch decides on the constitutionality of education laws. This ties directly to the issue of what's ethical or unethical. In this situation, the judicial branch has a large influence on what authoritative stakeholders view as ethical versus non-authoritative stakeholders view as unethical. And lastly, the president, who is in charge of the executive branch, appoints a Secretary of Education, who is the primary leader of the U.S. Department of Education, and ultimately has a lot of influence in national policies and how they're carried out or recommended for state. Two solutions that I propose to solve the issue of low-performing schools in rural areas include: 1. Build better relationships with constituencies and faculty and staff. 2. Host monthly or annual fundraising events. Establishing a strong relationship with legal authorities who oversee the policies for public schools, low-performing schools in rural areas will not only develop a better sense of mandates, but they will also be able to more directly express their concerns and have a better chance of receiving the help that's requested. For example, if the State Department of Education demanded that all public schools completed benchmark testing every September and March of every school year, they will likely have high confidence and a strong relationship with the schools who obey their commands versus schools who constantly question or refuse to do so. Hosting monthly or annual fundraising events will not only bring in more money for the school, but it will also raise more awareness for education in the local community. What does this look like? For solution 1, which was to build better relationships with constituencies, looks like the following. Faculty is required to attend both national and state level education conferences. Administrators are staying up to date with regulations. Administrators set strict procedures to meet regulations, and teachers frequently attend workshops related to their specific areas of improvement. These examples all relate to what should be implemented and demonstrated by local schools in the rural communities. Solution 1 continued. Set clear and measurable goals, conduct weekly meetings with the Human Resource Director, and conduct monthly evaluations of the State Department of Education's progress. Setting clear and measurable goals as well as conducting monthly evaluations of the State Department of Education's progress will ensure a better track of keeping up with progress or possibly failures. By conducting weekly meetings with the Human Resource Director, it ensures better utilization of the Human Resources Department, which could potentially increase teacher retention as well as student retention. All these goals or solutions listed on this slide are relevant to both the U.S. State Department of Education as well as local schools and the national U.S. Department of Education. And solution 2, which was host monthly or annual fundraising events, will look like the particular following: weekly bake sales, monthly car wash, monthly yard sales, or a partnership with local restaurants or companies who will donate a particular dollar percentage according to their profits of a particular week or day. This concludes my presentation. I hope you enjoyed both the examples, solutions, and information that I provided. Thank you for watching.